My ex said you'll never amount to anything. He had no idea about the $6 2M wire in my account. Owen said it at the parking garage door on a Friday afternoon. Good luck finding somewhere that needs what you do. He turned. He walked back toward the elevator. The garage door closed. I stood in the oil smell of the concrete holding a cardboard box with 8 years in it. I said nothing. I drove home. I made coffee. I sat at my standing desk and I looked at the street below my Capitol Hill window for a long time. 8 years I had built his client pipeline. 8 years of being introduced in rooms full of decision makers as my operations coordinator. 8 years without one word of credit, without one line of equity, not $1 of ownership. On Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., my phone notified me that $6.2 million had been transferred into my personal account. I stared at the number for a long time. Then I called my attorney. Not because I was confused, because I wanted to be certain before I allowed myself to be anything else. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that credit follows the person who speaks the loudest in the room. I watched that theory work for 8 years from the side of the room where it did not apply to me. For a while, I wondered whether I was doing something wrong, whether there was a register of self-promotion I had simply failed to locate. It took me until year 4 to understand what was actually happening. Credit is a performance. Underneath the performance is the actual structure. The accounts, the relationships, the legal instruments, and the structure belongs to whoever built it. I had built it. I had also, 2 years before any of this unfolded, filed the paperwork to make certain of that. I did not know then that I would need it. I filed it anyway. That is the habit of someone who has learned not to assume that the people around her will protect what she built. Hold that detail in your mind as we go back to the beginning. I was 29 years old and finishing my MBA at the University of Washington's Foster School of Business when I first met Owen. It was the winter semester. He was auditing a technology ventures seminar, not enrolled, just present, the way self-certain people sometimes occupy rooms they have not been formally invited into. He was pitching his software consultancy idea to anyone who would sit still long enough to hear it. He was 36 then. He would be 44 when I left. Owen was technically brilliant and socially certain. I know now what a specific and powerful combination that is. More powerful, perhaps, than intelligence alone, because social certainty reads as competence even when it is not. At 29, I confused it with vision. I was not the only one. Owen walked into a room, and the room arranged itself around him. He made you feel, simply by the direction of his attention, that you were part of something that was going to matter. I was 29 and smart and ambitious, and I believed him. We married 2 years later. The same year we married, the consultancy signed its first 3 enterprise clients. I will tell you plainly, I signed all 3 of them. Owen built the technical product and delivered the pitch. I made the initial calls, drafted the proposals, managed the onboarding, and kept every one of those relationships intact through the implementation delays and scope revisions and difficult quarterly conversations that are the actual texture of enterprise client management. We were a working team. I believed for a long time that we both understood that. Let me give you a specific example of what that team looked like. Our first enterprise client was a logistics company headquartered in Bellevue, a 3-year engagement worth roughly $400,000 in annual fees. I had found the introduction through a former foster school classmate, a contact I had developed and kept current over 2 years of professional networking that Owen was not part of. I arranged the initial meeting. I prepared the proposal. I drove the engagement structure and managed every concern the logistics company's CFO raised over the 3-month procurement process. The total contract value was $1.2 million over 3 years. When we signed, Owen took the congratulatory call in his car and said, "We got it. We got it, because I spent 3 months in contact with a CFO who needed to trust the people who were going to touch his company's operations." Owen had not spoken to the CFO once before the signing call. I am not telling you this to diminish Owen's contribution. He built the technical product that justified the engagement. I am telling you this so that when I say I built the client pipeline, you understand precisely what that means. It means I found the clients, I won their trust, and I kept their business. For 7 more enterprise accounts after that first one, the structure was identical. Owen built the technical side, I built the relationship side. The firm grew because of both. The press releases mentioned one of us. By year 3 of the firm, I was managing 7 enterprise accounts with a combined annual value of $6 million. By year 5, 11 accounts and $12 million in annual recurring revenue. By year 7, the firm's active client revenue was $17 million annually. I could have told you, without notes, the name of the primary contact at every account, the renewal date, the 3 terms each client cared about most, and the specific thing we could never, under any circumstances, get wrong with any of them. I attended every quarterly review for 8 years. I wrote every client communication that required a human tone rather than a technical specification. I built and managed the account management team that joined us in years 4 and 5. By any honest analysis, I was the person who held the client side of the business together. In those same 8 years, I was introduced at client meetings as my operations coordinator, not a partner, not a strategist. The coordinator. My name appeared on no equity documents. I was paid a salary, a good salary, I will not misrepresent that, a base of $145,000 in the later years with a performance bonus, but a salary, not a share of the business I had spent 8 years building. I asked about equity once, in year 3. Owen said we would revisit it when the firm was more stable. The firm's revenue had grown from $800,000 to $17 million over those years. It was never stable enough for equity to be revisited. I stopped asking. I put that answer in a particular folder in my mind, behind a divider labeled evidence, and I kept working. My home office in Capitol Hill was a spare room with a standing desk and a large monitor and a window that faced the street. I had set it up when the firm first started and worked there 3 days a week for years. The client communications, the proposal drafts, the quarterly preparation. The room smelled of fresh coffee in the mornings and old books in the evenings. There was a filing cabinet in the corner behind the door, a practical 2-drawer model I had bought secondhand. I had organized that cabinet the way I organize everything, precisely, by category, with tabs I could locate without looking. Behind the tab labeled Administrative, in the back of the bottom drawer, there were 2 manila envelopes. The first had a formation date on it. The second had a date in blue ink written on the outside. Those envelopes were the most important thing in that room. More important than the monitor. More important than the laptop. more important, in the end, than anything Owen had in his glass-walled South Lake Union office. What I did in year 6, 2 years before the divorce, was form a limited liability company under my personal name, Solus Relationship Partners, LLC. A small, quiet structure. I told our accountant it appeared on my personal tax returns. I used it to manage the client relationship and engagement coordination work on several of the larger enterprise accounts. The work Owen had always called the soft side of the business. The work that generated the trust, that generated the contracts, that generated the $17 million he took credit for. I held this structure not as a weapon. I held it the way you hold a backup key for a lock you hope will never fail. Because I had learned to read certain signs. Because the communication structure had shifted. Because I am an EMBA who has read hundreds of contracts, and I know that the time to prepare a position is before you need it, not after. I remember the afternoon I filed the LLC paperwork. It was a Tuesday in late spring, the kind of Seattle afternoon that apologizes for the winter by offering 2 hours of clean gold light before the clouds return. I was at my standing desk in the Capitol Hill home office. I had the Secretary of State's online filing portal open on my browser. I had the name already chosen, Solus Relationship Partners. 3 minutes and $65, which I paid on my personal Visa card. I printed the confirmation and put it in the first manila envelope, labeled with the filing date in blue ink, and placed it in the back of the bottom drawer behind the tab labeled Administrative. Then I closed the laptop and made a cup of coffee and stood at the window watching the street below. I did not feel triumphant about what I had just done. I felt prepared. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Triumph is an emotion. Preparation is a structure. I had been building toward this structure for 2 years, slowly and quietly, without announcing it. I had told one person, our accountant. I had not told Owen. He had never asked about the formation of any independent professional structure on my part. He had never thought to ask. That, as it turned out, was the most consequential oversight of his professional life. The first sign that the marriage was ending arrived before Owen named it. He began CCing his personal attorney on firm communications that had previously gone only to our shared business attorney. A small change, an extra name in the to field of an email. I noticed it the first time it happened, a Tuesday morning in March, a year before we separated. I am an EMBA who has read hundreds of vendor contracts and service agreements. I know what it means when the communication structure of an organization shifts. It means someone is preparing a position. I noted the shift. I said nothing. I kept my counsel and I kept working. And I opened the SARP LLC folder on my laptop that same evening and reviewed the formation documents and the engagement letters and confirmed they were exactly as I had left them. Do you know that specific sensation? The sensation of watching someone prepare to do something to you while they believe you are not watching? Have you ever felt that? There is no heat in it. At least, not at first. What there is a sharpening, a sorting of what you know from what you merely suspect, a careful decision about what to say and when. I had decided to say nothing yet. I had decided to watch. The second sign was documented in a way that removed the remaining uncertainty. In January of the year we separated, 4 full months before Owen told me he wanted a divorce, he filed an amendment to the firm's operating agreement. The amendment added a non-transferability clause to all client relationships held by the firm. The language was designed broadly. If it had applied to the engagement letters I had signed through my LLC, it would have undercut the position I had been carefully building. The amendment required both managing partners' signatures under the terms of our original operating agreement. Owen's signature was on it. Mine was not. That made it legally unenforceable as to me, and we both understood this, though neither of us said so aloud. I found the amendment on a Tuesday afternoon while reviewing the firm's administrative filings. I printed it. I put it in a manila envelope. I wrote the date on the outside in blue ink. I filed it in the bottom drawer, behind the first manila envelope. Then I made a cup of coffee and went back to work. Have you ever found the evidence of a plan you were already half expecting? It is a curious feeling, not shock, not outrage, but a very specific clarity, a sorting of columns, what you know, what you can prove, what needs to happen next. What needed to happen next was a conversation with Felix Drummond. Felix was 51 years old, a business attorney in Seattle with an office in First Hill, and a quality of thoroughness that I have not encountered in many other professionals. I had known him professionally for 3 years before the divorce proceedings. When the communication structure of my marriage changed, when I noticed the new attorney CC'd on firm emails, Felix was the first person outside the firm I called. I called him 6 weeks before Owen formally asked for a meeting about the marriage. I came to his First Hill office on a Tuesday morning in early spring. It was a room with city views and a conference table with a carafe of water in the center and 2 yellow legal pads. I laid out the SARP LLC structure and the Alderton engagement and the 14 months of coordination work and what the success fee would be if the deal closed as expected. Felix listened without writing anything down. When I finished, he said, "The only question is whether Owen's team knows what SARP LLC is." I said, "They don't. Owen has never asked about it." Felix said, "Then we carve it out by name, in specific language, and we make it a condition." That was the conversation that built the foundation. Everything else was built on those 2 sentences Felix said in his First Hill conference room. We spent 3 hours that afternoon getting the carve-out language exactly right. Felix's hourly rate was $450. That afternoon cost me $1,350 and returned $6. $2 million. At the end of the session, he said, "The language is solid. The question now is whether they read it." 3 weeks later, Owen's attorney accepted it on page 9 of the asset schedule without a comment. They had not read it carefully. The dotted line became a wall. The day the settlement was finalized was a Thursday in September. Gray and cool, the kind of Seattle morning that has given up on warmth for the year. Felix and I sat on one side of the table at the mediator's office in Belltown, a neutral space with a window overlooking the water. Owen and his attorney sat across from us. The mediator, a retired family court judge, had the asset schedule in front of him. 12 pages. We had been working through them since 9 in the morning. By 2 in the afternoon, we had reached page 9. The carve-out clause for SARP LLC was in the 3rd paragraph of that page, in the middle of a section containing 4 other items. Owen's attorney read the page. He paused briefly at the SARP LLC clause. He looked at Owen. Owen looked at the clause. Then Owen's attorney said, "The LLC interests. What's the current valuation on that?" Felix said, "It's a relationship management entity. Client coordination work. The valuation at this time is essentially nominal. The LLC holds no physical assets and no active revenue contracts." Owen's attorney said, "All right." He moved to the next item. I looked at the window. The water was gray. A container ship was moving slowly toward the port. Felix had said at this time with extraordinary precision. The LC held no active revenue contracts at that moment. The Alderton success fee was conditional, contingent on a deal that had not yet closed. Every word Felix had said was technically accurate. Owen's attorney had not asked a follow-up question. He had accepted nominal and moved on. I looked at the window for a moment longer. Then I looked back at the asset schedule. I said nothing. The divorce was finalized that September afternoon. Owen retained the firm, the equity, the technical contracts, the South Lake Union office. I retained the carve-out, my IMBA, and my filing cabinet. I signed a non-compete that covered technical consulting services, which I had never performed and had no intention of performing, and I returned to work. Not at the firm. From my Capitol Hill home, quietly, building the SARP LLC's client service infrastructure with a seriousness and scope it had not previously required. I had always known the Alderton Group acquisition was coming. I had managed that relationship for 14 months. The deal was expected to close in late winter or early spring. The success fee, payable to the coordination entity upon the deal's close, was something Felix and I had discussed during the LC formation process. $6.2 million. I had known that number for a year. I had not been certain of the exact closing date. I had organized everything so that when the date arrived, the structure would hold. Then came the Thursday that accelerated the timeline. Late February. I drove to the South Lake Union office because Owen had asked me to attend a briefing on the Alderton Group closing schedule. Even after the divorce, I remained the client contact of record on the Alderton account. And there were coordination documents requiring my review. I drove across town in the early spring drizzle, parked on the street, and took the elevator to the glass-walled conference room where 3 of Owen's technical staff were already seated. An account manager named Derek, 2 years with the firm, never once in an Alderton meeting before that afternoon, sat at the far end looking at his phone. Owen walked in last. He stood at the head of the table and laid out the closing timeline and the announcement structure, and then he looked at me and said, in the tone of someone settling a question he considers closed, "The Alderton announcement won't include your name. It's not really your area. I want you to understand what 14 months of work looks like. It looks like 16 client meetings, everyone attended, everyone prepared for. It looks like every proposal drafted and revised and redrafted. It looks like every adjustment to the acquisition timeline when Alderton's board raised concerns in month 8. It looks like every relationship call and every document and every managed complication that kept a major enterprise client engaged through a complex transaction. A deal with a $6.2 million success fee attached to it. Not really your area." He said it and moved to the next agenda item. The 3 technical staff members looked at their laptops. Derek looked at the table. I looked at Owen. I was very calm. I made a note on my legal pad. I said nothing. When the meeting ended, I collected my documents, walked to my car, and called Felix. He answered on the second ring. I told him what Owen had said. He asked whether the closing date was still on track. I said yes. He said, "Then we do nothing different. You leave. The wire comes to SARP LLC. That is the end of it." I asked if he was fully confident in the LLC's position. He said he had been confident since the day he drafted the carve-out, and that his only genuine surprise across this entire process was that Owen's attorney had not asked a single follow-up question about SARP LLC during the settlement negotiations. I told him I had noticed the same thing. We agreed I would call him Monday. On Friday afternoon, I cleared my desk at the South Lake Union office. A mug that had belonged to my mother, a plant I had kept alive at a standing desk for 4 years, 8 binders of quarterly review materials I had built from scratch. I packed them into a box. I carried the box to the elevator. Owen was in the lobby when the doors opened. He looked at the box. He said, "Good luck finding somewhere that needs what you do." He turned and walked back toward the elevator, and the parking garage door closed behind him, and I stood in the oil smell of the concrete holding 8 years in cardboard. Sunday evening, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list. Not a list of grievances, a list of what I knew to be true. The LLC was validly formed. The engagement letter was signed. The carve-out was in the settlement agreement. The deal was closing Monday. I read the list twice. I put it in the filing cabinet with the manila envelopes. Then I went to bed. At 8:47 a.m. On Monday morning, my phone lit up on the standing desk. A push alert from my bank. The wire amount. The originating entity, the acquiring company's payment processing arm. The receiving account. The SARP LLC operating account. $6,200,000. I stared at the number. I set the phone face down on the desk. I made a cup of coffee. I picked the phone up again. The number had not changed. I want to be honest with you about what that moment felt like. It did not feel like triumph. It did not feel like relief. It felt like standing at the edge of something very large and knowing that before you take a step, you must understand exactly what ground you are standing on. I had known this wire was coming. I had structured things so that when it would arrive to the correct entity, and I still needed to verify, not because I doubted the structure, because I have learned in every professional context I have occupied that certainty without documentation is not certainty. It is a feeling. Feelings are not evidence. Evidence is evidence. I called Felix at 9:15. He answered immediately. "Send me the bank confirmation. Then do nothing for 48 hours while I speak with Alderton's counsel." I sent the confirmation. I sat down. 48 hours is a long time when you are sitting at a standing desk in a spare room in Capitol Hill, watching a number that represents 8 years of work you were told did not count. I did not call anyone. I did not tell Yumi. I sat with it and I verified. I reviewed the LC formation documents. I reviewed the engagement letter and its payment clause, the clause describing the $6. $2 million success fee and its triggering conditions. I reviewed the carve-out language in the settlement agreement. I reviewed the non-compete and confirmed again, for perhaps the 12th time, that it applied only to technical consulting services, which SARP LLC had never performed. I made notes. I organized everything into a single sequenced PDF. At hour 6, I made a second cup of coffee. At hour 12, I slept. At hour 23, I made a third cup and watched the Seattle afternoon turn gray. On the second morning of the 48 hours, Tuesday, the morning of the call from Alderton's general counsel, I woke at 6 a.m. and went directly to the standing desk without making coffee first. I wanted to look at the notification again, to confirm it was still there, that it had not been a processing error or a misrouted wire that would be reversed overnight. It was there. $6,200,000. I read the originating entity name 3 times. I opened the SARP LLC engagement letter on my laptop and read the payment clause. The conditions had been met. The deal had closed. The payment had been made to the correct entity. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the back of the building behind mine, its brick face still gray in the early morning light, the alley below empty except for a recycling bin and a bicycle. The city was very quiet. It was the particular quiet of a Tuesday morning in early spring, before the construction sites start up, before the traffic builds, when Seattle sounds like itself. I stayed at the window for 20 minutes. Then I went back to the standing desk and added 3 more pages of supporting documentation to the PDF. Then I waited. At hour 46, on Tuesday afternoon, Alderton's general counsel called me directly. She said their internal review had identified the SARP LLC wire, and she was calling to confirm whether it had been made in error. I said the transfer was correctly made. I explained the LLC structure in 3 sentences: formation date, engagement letter date, carve out in the settlement agreement. She listened. When I finished, she said, "Thank you, Ms. Solis, then we're confirmed." The call ended. I put the phone down on the standing desk. I looked at the street below the Capitol Hill window. A dog walker, a delivery van. The early spring air sharp with cedar and the faint bitterness of espresso from the cafe on the corner. I felt, very precisely, the sensation of something heavy and diffuse finding its correct shape. Not lighter, just organized. Comprehensible. Mine, that was the moment that mattered. Not the $6.2 million, the confirmation that what I had built was real. That the 8 years were not invisible. That the structure held. Felix called that afternoon to confirm his independent verification with Alderton's counsel. The position was airtight. The LLC predated the divorce by 2 years. The engagement letter predated the separation by 11 months. The success fee was a contractual obligation from the acquiring company to SARP LLC, triggered by the deal's close, and it had nothing to do with the marital estate or the non-compete. He said, "Sit still through the weekend. We'll speak Monday." I said I could do that. I was sitting at the standing desk at 7 o'clock Monday evening when my phone rang with Owen's number. I answered. He said he had heard from Marcus, a mutual contact in the Alderton acquisition chain, that a wire had gone to an LLC connected to me. I said yes. That was correct. He said, "How is that possible? What LLC?" I explained SARP LLC in the same 3 sentences I had used with Alderton's general counsel. Formation date. Engagement letter date. Carve out in the settlement agreement. He was quiet. Then he said, with a tone I had not heard from him before, not anger, but something closer to the vertigo of a person who has just discovered the floor is not where they believed it to be. "We need to talk about this." I said all further communication should go through Felix Drummond. You have his contact information. The call lasted 4 minutes. He did not call again that evening. I put the phone down and opened the SARP LLC folder on my laptop. I had been opening that folder every few months for 2 years. I opened it one last time. Formation date. Carve out language. Engagement letter. Signed 11 months before the separation. I closed the folder. I made chamomile tea and read for an hour and went to sleep. Have you ever heard the exact sound of someone discovering they have made an unrecoverable error? Even through a phone, even in 4 quiet minutes, it has an unmistakable quality. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is the sound of a person whose certainty was built on an assumption they never thought to examine. 2 weeks after that Monday evening call, a letter arrived at Felix's office. It came from a different attorney from the one who had handled the divorce settlement, which told me something immediately about how Owen was framing the situation internally. The letter argued that the client relationships used to coordinate the Alderton Group acquisition had been developed using proprietary firm data and resources during the marriage, and that therefore the $6.2 million success fee was subject to marital asset claims and should be placed in escrow pending further review. 4 pages. 3 Washington state precedents cited. Felix called within the hour. Felix is not a man who uses extra words. He said, "This is the opening argument of someone who knows he has already lost, but is not yet willing to say so. The LLC predates the divorce by 2 years. The engagement letter predates the separation by 11 months. The carve-out is in the settlement agreement Owen signed." His attorney either did not read the settlement carefully or is counting on you not having kept your documents. "Do you have your documents?" I said I had them organized chronologically in a PDF and could send them within the hour. He said, "Do that, and call Yumi." Yumi Tanaka was 36 years old. She had joined the firm in year 4. When we needed client managers, and I had hired her specifically because she had the rarest skill in enterprise account work, the ability to hear what a client is not saying and respond to what they actually need rather than what they asked for. Owen had referred to this quality as Yumi's people thing. He used it for 4 years without naming it properly or compensating it accordingly. When he restructured the account management team the previous October, Yumi's position had been eliminated. She had left without public comment. She had attended 14 of the 16 Alderton client sessions I had run over 14 months. When I called Yumi and explained Owen's attorney's argument that the Alderton relationships had been developed using proprietary firm data, she was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she said, "That is not true, and I can say so in writing." I told her I needed a formal statement. She said she would have it to Felix by end of day. Yumi's statement was 3 pages, organized by date. It named each Alderton session she had attended, the participants, the primary discussion points, and the entity, SARP LLC, on behalf of which I had attended. It confirmed that no proprietary technical data from Owen's development systems had appeared in any client session. It confirmed that the Alderton relationship had been initiated through a personal introduction I had made using a contact I had developed independently, predating my marriage. Felix attached the statement to a response package that also included the SARP LLC formation documents, the engagement letters organized by date, and a confirmatory letter from Alderton's general counsel. He sent the package on a Friday afternoon. 3 days after the package was sent, Yumi called me from across the city. Her voice was measured. She said, "He's been telling people in the network that you used firm data to set up the deal." I asked how widely the claim had circulated. She said 2 separate contacts had mentioned it to her in the preceding 48 hours. I asked whether those contacts had expressed any view of the claim's credibility. She said both had called specifically to tell her they did not believe it. They had worked with me and knew how I operated, and both had offered to support formally if needed. I noted both names. That same week, a call came from Marcus Hale, a project manager in the Alderton acquisition chain, Owen's technical point of contact on the deal. He called to say Owen had reached out asking whether there was any record of Petrosolis accessing the firm's technical systems in connection with the Alderton work. Marcus had told Owen there was no such record. In his direct observation, every aspect of the coordination work had been handled through SARP LLC, with no reference to Owen's technical systems. He said he was calling me because he thought I should know the inquiry had been made. I thanked him. I forwarded the substance of the call to Felix that afternoon. Felix's reply was brief, another document for the file. The following Friday, 13 days after Felix had sent the response package, a mutual contact forwarded me an email thread in which Owen had begun arguing that the SARP LLC's engagement letters had been drafted using the firm's legal budget during the marriage, and therefore the LLC's formation costs were marital assets. Felix requested the firm's legal billing records through formal discovery. The records were clear. The SARP LLC formation and all engagement letters had been billed to my personal account, paid on my personal credit card. The monthly statements were in my filing cabinet, organized by month, because I am the kind of person who keeps monthly statements organized by month. The argument collapsed within 48 hours of the billing records being produced. On day 14, Owen's attorney called Felix to suggest an informal settlement. The number on the table was $400,000, a payment to Owen in exchange for dropping all claims and releasing any future interest in SARP LLC. Felix called me after the conversation. I told Felix to decline. He said, "Are you certain?" I said yes. He said, "Good. So am I." The offer was the move of someone who knows the position has collapsed and is trying to extract something from the wreckage. The carve-out was valid. The engagement letter was valid. The structure was correct. I had not spent 2 years building a structure in order to write a $400,000 check to acknowledge a claim that had no basis. Felix sent the decline in writing that afternoon. Owen's attorney did not call Felix again. There was also a moment on day 9 that I have not yet described, and I am going to describe it because it was the most difficult moment of the entire 19 days. I received a call from a colleague named Patricia, a senior client manager I had stayed in professional touch with for 2 years. Patricia called to tell me that she had heard from Owen's network that the LLC situation was complicated, and that Owen had implied the carve-out might have been drafted to obscure assets rather than legitimately exclude a premarital professional structure. She was calling to give me the opportunity to respond before she formed a view. I want to tell you what I felt when she said that. I felt the particular cold of being misjudged by someone you have treated fairly. It is sharper than being attacked by an enemy, because it comes from an unexpected direction. I thanked Patricia for calling directly. I told her the LLC had been formed 2 years before the divorce, had appeared on my tax returns, and had been disclosed to our shared accountant throughout. I gave her Felix's name. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I should have called you first." She called Felix the following day. He confirmed everything. She called me back to say so. I noted the experience as information. The most reliable protection against a false narrative is a complete and accurate record. Do you understand what was happening structurally across those 19 days? Owen was not attacking from strength. He was cycling through available arguments, the proprietary data claim, the marital asset claim, the legal budget argument, the $400,000 informal settlement offer. Each one was a door. Each door had a lock. I had prepared every key. I did not feel triumphant about this. I felt the steady, measured satisfaction of a person whose preparation has met the circumstance it was built for. I felt organized. I felt above everything. Correct, not self-righteous, but in the way of someone who did the work, kept the receipts, and is watching those receipts do exactly what receipts are supposed to do. On a Tuesday morning, 19 days after Owen's attorney had filed the initial claim. The withdrawal letter arrived at Felix's office. Felix called me at 9:30. He read me the operative paragraph. Client withdraws all claims related to the Alderton transaction and acknowledges SARP LLC's independent engagement with the Alderton Group predating any marital dispute. One sentence. 24 words. 8 years settled in 24 words. I was at my standing desk when he read it. Yumi was in the next room. She had been working from my home office since the previous week. I did not make a sound when Felix finished reading. I said, "Thank you, Felix. Please send me the document." He said he would. I put the phone down. I printed the withdrawal letter when it arrived in my email. I read it 3 times. The full letter, not just the operative paragraph. 2 pages, formal in tone, and notable primarily for what it did not contain. No acknowledgement of error, no expression of regret, no explanation of why the claim had been filed in the first place. It simply withdrew. In legal correspondence, that is sufficient. I printed a 3rd copy and put it in the filing cabinet behind the 2 manila envelopes. The cabinet now held, in order, the LLC formation document, the unenforceable operating agreement amendment, the engagement letter, the carve-out clause, the bank confirmation, the Alderton Council's confirmatory letter, Yumi's witness statement, Felix's response package, and the withdrawal letter. Every document that had been needed had been produced from that cabinet. That is the thing about preparation. You do not always know which documents you will need until you need them, and the only protection against uncertainty is completeness. I stood at the standing desk for a moment. The early spring light was coming through the Capitol Hill window, the same window I had looked through on the morning the notification arrived. Below me the street was ordinary, a dog walker, a delivery van double parked 2 doors down. In the distance, 3 miles east, the parking garage on South Lake Union was exactly where it had always been. I had driven past that garage twice since the Monday of the wire notification. Both times I had not looked at it. There are things you are not ready to look at directly until you know exactly what you are seeing. That Tuesday morning, I knew. I looked east toward South Lake Union, toward the parking structure and the elevator lobby where Owen had delivered his verdict with a cardboard box between us. I found I had very little feeling about it. Not anger, not triumph. Something much quieter. The feeling of a chapter that has been correctly written and can now be filed. I walked to the kitchen. I made a 2nd cup of coffee. I knocked on the open door of the room where Yumi was working. She looked up from her laptop. I said, "It's done." She closed the laptop. She looked at me with the recognition of someone who has seen what correct looks like. Then she said, "What does the new firm need first?" That question became the conversation that became Solis Partners. I had asked Yumi to meet for coffee the previous week. We sat at a cafe on Capitol Hill, 2 blocks from my home office. She arrived first. She had already ordered. We sat for an hour and talked about the preceding 3 weeks and about what had happened at the firm in the year since she had left. She told me that 3 of our former accounts had inquired about her availability in the months since she left Owen's firm, accounts she had managed, contacts who had her number. She had not pursued any of them because she had not had a structure to pursue them in. I told her I had a structure. I told her the name. She said, "Solis Partners." I said, "Yes." She said, "Your name." I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I watched Owen introduce you as the operations coordinator at the Alderton session in month 3. I remember thinking, she's the one running this room and nobody is going to say so. I told her I remembered the meeting. She said, I'd like to be part of the firm where they say so. We shook hands across the table. The coffee had gone cold. Neither of us had touched it for 20 minutes. That is what it looks like when two people are building something. I seeded the new firm with $1.4 million from the SARP LLC operating account. I named it Soulless Partners. My name, which had not appeared on the original firm's letterhead once in 8 years. I retained Felix for the entity formation. Yumi came on as founding partner. We filed the articles of organization on a Thursday. By the following Thursday, we had a registered entity, a capitalization structure, a partnership agreement, and a business development list of 42 names. What I want to tell you about that week of building out Soulless Partners, the week after the withdrawal letter arrived, is that it had a specific quality I did not anticipate. I had expected paperwork. I had expected the administrative grind of entity formation, banking setup, vendor contracts, insurance. What I found was that the grind felt, unexpectedly, like relief. Every form I signed had my name on it, not a designation, not a role title. My name, Petra Solis. Every check I wrote from the operating account was drawn on an account I held. Felix helped me open the Solis Partners operating account on a Tuesday afternoon. The opening deposit was $1.4 million. The account officer looked at the deposit confirmation and then looked at me and said, "Starting a new venture?" I said yes. She said, "Congratulations." 2 words. I thanked her. I carried the receipt out to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The receipt said Solis Partners. It said my name. It said the date. It said $1.4 million. I folded it and put it in my wallet, behind my business card, the first Soulless Partners business card I had printed 3 days earlier with my name and title on it. Principal and founder, not operations coordinator. Principal and founder. I started the engine and drove back to Capitol Hill. The first enterprise client we signed was a technology company I had met at an industry conference 4 years earlier, a relationship I had maintained independently, through quarterly check-ins that had nothing to do with Owen's firm. The second was a healthcare organization that had been an Alderton adjacency, a contact who called us before we called them, because word had moved through the industry that Petra Solis was running her own firm. The third was a financial services firm whose primary relationship contact called on a Wednesday and said, without preamble, "I heard about the Alderton deal. I want to be your client." We signed all 3 in the first 30 days. 2 more in the second 30 days. In the first 60 days, Solis Partners' signed revenue pipeline was $2.3 million. Felix called to note that the revenue structure was developing faster than either of us had projected. He said the only number he was watching closely was whether Yumi's modification to the partnership structure would hold under the revenue split as the firm scaled. I told him I had been watching the same number. We discussed it for 12 minutes and agreed on a refinement to the agreement. Felix billed me for 1 hour at his standard rate. I paid the invoice that afternoon. Owen's consultancy lost its 2 largest accounts in the 6 months following the Alderton closing. I learned this through the peripheral channels of a small industry, a conversation at a client event, a reference in an email chain I was copied on. I did not seek the information. I noted it with a feeling I would describe as unsurprised. Both of those accounts had been relationships I had managed for years. The contacts had known me longer than they had known anyone else at Owen's firm. When an organization loses the person who held its relationships, the relationships sometimes leave with that person. That is not a story about winning. It is a story about how client relationships actually work, which was the point I had been making in rooms full of people who were not listening for 8 years. I have not commented on any of this publicly. When clients or colleagues who know the history have asked what I think of how things turned out, I have said, I think they turned out correctly. That is all I have said. The parking garage on South Lake Union is still there. I drive past it sometimes on the way to client meetings. I do not slow down. The last time was a Thursday morning in November, on the way to a client meeting with a company that had joined Solis Partners in month 4. I was 15 minutes early, so I took the long route through South Lake Union. The garage appeared in my windshield and passed. I was thinking about the agenda. 2 questions I wanted to ask before the formal presentation, whether Yumi had sent the previous quarter's follow-up materials. I was thinking about work. About my work. In my firm. On my way to my client, with my name on every document in my bag. The thing I have thought about most, in the months since all of this concluded, is not the wire. It is not the withdrawal letter. It is not the $6.2 million or the $1.4 million I used to seed the new firm or the $2.3 million in the first 60-day pipeline. What I have thought about most is the 48 hours between the notification and the confirmation. The 48 hours I spent sitting in my spare room verifying everything I already knew, from every angle available to me, before I allowed myself to feel any of it. I have turned that process over many times. It is the behavior of someone who has learned not to confuse knowing something with proving it. It is the behavior of someone who was told, for 8 years, that her work was support rather than substance, and who absorbed that verdict not as a wound but as a discipline of documentation. That discipline was the most valuable thing those 8 years produced, not the revenue, not the relationships, the habit of making sure, own the work, name the structure, keep the documents. To Owen, the support staff owns the building now. The support staff built the building, and the building has a new address, and the name on the door is hers. What would you have done? Would you have told Owen about the LLC during the divorce negotiations, or kept the carve-out quiet and let the settlement speak for itself? Tell me in the comments. Share this story with someone who has been the invisible one in the room, the one doing the work while someone else stood at the front and took the credit. They need to hear this. And thank you, as always, for listening.